Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Rewire Long Island webinar, Create Your Rain Garden by Robin Simmen. So a rain garden is a way of reducing the rain runoff caused by lawns or paved surfaces. It is designed to hold and capture stormwater and allow it to get absorbed back into the soil. Robin Simmen, our speaker today, is going to walk us through the steps needed to create your own rain garden. Robin Simmen is a landscape designer and environmental educator who focuses on native plants, sustainable horticulture, and water conservation. Formerly with Brooklyn Botanic Garden and Cornell Cooperative Extension, she holds a BA from Cornell University and a master's degree from Conway School of Landscape Design. She's currently a board member and chair of the Landscape Committee at North Fork Audubon Society. So without further delay, I'll hand this over to Robin.
Thank you, T.S. I am really happy to be here because talking about water-wise gardening is incredibly interesting to me, and I care very much about it. I started teaching about rain gardening 20 years ago when I was working for Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and people were just starting to really understand in the Northeast that we had to pay more attention to conserving water and paying attention to the way we used water for irrigation and the way we were polluting our own water supplies. And so rain gardening is a wonderful, sustainable approach to horticulture. And tonight, I'm first going to talk about Long Island's water resources and the challenge of dealing with stormwater. And then I'll describe rain gardening and show you some examples of it nationwide. Next, we'll go over how to design and install a rain garden using native plants. And finally, I'll show you a case study of a rain garden in Greenport, New York, and how it transformed a former lawn into a lush, sustainable habitat for birds, pollinators, and humans who are hungry for a beautiful, low-maintenance, natural landscape, like this one. I love this. This is a beautiful rain garden in Ithaca, New York. So, water is life, absolutely. And life on Earth depends on it. Our ocean salt water makes up 97% of all the water on Earth. And of the remaining 3%, 2/3 was until very recently frozen solid in polar ice caps and glaciers. But that is melting fast due to climate change and mainly going into the oceans. So that leaves just 1% of all of Earth's water to meet our freshwater needs in the forms of lakes, rivers, and underground aquifers. 1% fresh water. Surrounded by salt water, on Long Island, all our fresh water comes from rain and snow. And precipitation, it's our sole source. That's it. Whether it rains down upon us, it snows down upon us, and then it hits our porous soils, and then it recharges the aquifers that we drink from, which are below us. Our average annual rainfall, 44 inches, I should say, is well above the national average. So we're really blessed with abundant water here. And we get a consistent rainfall, 3 to 4 inches per month. I mean, sometimes it's a little less in the summer, a little more in the spring and certainly in the winter, but it's remarkably dependable. And as a result, I think we take water for granted. It's an easy thing to do when you don't have to think about it. You just, turn on the spigot and out comes the water. Unfortunately, that's leading to a tremendous pumping out of our existing aquifers below us, which aren't getting recharged as quickly as they need to if they're going to keep up with our demand for fresh water. Also, our water quality is very pure on Long Island because that water is trickling down through layers of sand and it's being purified as it's entering the aquifer before it gets pumped back up again. And it's acidic. And that's one of the reasons why our native plant community on Long Island tends to like acidic conditions, because it's a naturally acidic water supply. So we have a lot of hollies and plants that really, rhododendrons, azaleas. Our native plant community tends to lean towards acidic conditions. And the aquifer out on the east end of Long Island, where I live in East Marion on the North Fork, and on the South Shore as well, the aquifer there is much shallower than it is up island, up west. And we're getting increased levels of development, housing development, and more swimming pools and more lawns are being installed. And all of these things are increasing our use of water, fresh water, to maintain them. At the same time, sea levels are rising. And so there's a saltwater incursion that's happening in the shoreline wells as a vacuum from overuse of those wells sucks in salt water from the nearby ocean. And so it's a real problem. Overuse of water for things other than our fresh, our drinking needs is something that we really have to, especially on the East End, keep our eye on. So where does our wastewater go? We talked about where our water from the natural world comes from, but where does what we use up go? The same place today that it's been going since Roman engineers first tackled this problem, into the road. When I visited Pompeii and saw these water-eroded stones paving ancient streets that also functioned as open-air sewers, I had an aha moment. Our current stormwater sewer design still follows these same basic principles. Dump all your wastewater into the road. And we can do better than this, and we have to do better than this, because every time it rains, that precious water tumbling down to the earth frequently hits hard, modern surfaces that don't allow it to seep into the earth, but instead eventually shunts that storm water into a storm sewer somewhere. And as Joni Mitchell put it so perfectly, we paved paradise and put up a parking lot, as well as millions of square miles of lawns, roofs, sidewalks, driveways, and roads. Hey, wait a minute, you're saying lawns? What about lawns? Nothing wrong with lawns, right? They're green, they're absorbing rainwater and snow. Well, not really. As was alluded to in the introduction, lawns actually don't absorb water very well. Their grass roots are very dense, and if you stand outside during a rainstorm, you can watch sheets of water roll off a lawn into the street. So they might be green, but they're not really helpful in terms of recharging our aquifers. As a result, we have billions of gallons of stormwater that are spilling annually into our rivers, streams, lakes, estuaries, and beaches. And the Environmental Protection Agency considers stormwater pollution to be our biggest threat to clean drinking water. Stormwater pollution is our biggest threat to clean drinking water. Meanwhile, during the summertime, we are using about 40% of our precious drinking water supplies for outdoor irrigation, and that's mainly on lawns. So what's the solution? Well, how about finding a way to use the rain where it falls? For example, plant a rain garden. What if our suburbs looked like this? It would be a very different world, wouldn't it? So before we go any further, don't worry about taking detailed notes. Everything I'm going to talk about is covered in 2 fact sheets that I wrote while I was working for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County. And one of those fact sheets is called Creating a Rain Garden. It covers the step-by-step mechanics of designing and installing rain gardens. And the other fact sheet is called Native Plants for Long Island Rain Gardens. It's a carefully vetted list of plant species native to Long Island that are grouped according to their ecotypes. For example, plants that like sunny, wet conditions, etc. I think the links to these fact sheets are being posted in the chat so that you can download them later. You can also find these fact sheets if you go to ccesuffolk.org and just search for their titles, Creating a Rain Garden or Native Plants for Long Island Rain Gardens. Okay, this is a typical cross section of a suburban front yard. It shows over here, here's the street on the left and the curb, the street curb. And then there's often a little strip of grass. Sometimes it's called the hell strip because it's really hard to grow anything there. And then there's the sidewalk. There's somebody walking down the sidewalk. And then maybe there's a tree planted, and typically what you'd see right here would be a lawn. But in this case, we see a rain garden, which is planted in this shallow depression. And the water for this garden is coming from up here. It's coming from this roof. So when it rains, the water rolls across this roof into the gutter. Then it comes down the gutter, or down the storm pipe, I should say, and then into this rain garden, which is a shallow depression designed to soak up water and support trees, shrubs, flowers, and grasses that tolerate both wet and dry conditions. People sometimes confuse rain gardens with water gardens. They're not the same thing. A rain garden is not a pond, and it won't breed mosquitoes, which require 1 to 14 days in standing water to go from eggs to adults. Most people, when they design a rain garden, want to protect the foundations of any building nearby by planting that rain garden maybe 10 feet away. And also, it's not a good idea to plant a rain garden directly under a large tree because you don't want to damage the tree roots. It's okay if there's a little bit of feathering there, but generally speaking, you want to avoid tree root systems when you're digging out a rain garden. So the benefits of rain gardens are so many. First of all, they trap and treat all those toxic pollutants that are part of stormwater, like all the water rolling down the street during a rainstorm is picking up oil and gasoline and toxic metals from transportation. And actually, the same thing can be true of water that rolls off your roof tiles. Sometimes the tiling is not great. So the water that gets shuttled into a rain garden has the opportunity to be filtered by the garden itself, the roots, and then the sand and soil beneath it before it goes down into the aquifer. So it's a great way of trapping those pollutants before they get into our water supply. Also, rain gardens recharge the aquifer 30% better than a lawn would. They allow more water to penetrate into the aquifer. They provide wonderful wildlife habitat. They're easy to install, which we're going to discuss. They need no chemical additives, no fertilizer, no pesticides. They're low maintenance and they look great year round. I mean, I love looking out in the wintertime at the seed heads on my native plants and in the rain gardens that I've designed, because there's something really sculptural about them. And also there are insects that are taking shelter there over the winter, and birds are eating the seeds and the seed heads. So they're really quite beautiful year round. I first learned about rain gardens 20 years ago at a gardening conference in Minneapolis. Due to increasingly dry conditions in the Midwest and West, many places out west have been encouraging people to plant rain gardens and conserve water for a very long time. In fact, there are plenty of municipalities that offer tax abatements for rain gardens, will help people fund the planting of rain gardens and some of the infrastructure involved. And Maplewood, Minnesota is a really wonderful example of a community that got together with its sewage department and said, let's figure out a way to reduce the number of storm sewers in our community by doing collective curbside rain gardens. And so down here on the right, you can see this very, very large rain garden that's planted right next to the road. It's absorbing all of the stormwater that once upon a time would have gone into a stormwater sewer there. And they've done that all over the entire community of Maplewood. They've posted a lot of material online about how to design these sorts of projects. And so I encourage you to go online and just search Maplewood, Minnesota, if you're looking for some great ideas on rain gardening. And over here in a more urban part of Minneapolis, you can see rain gardens that are planted in that hell strip, right? They look just gorgeous and so much better than dying brown grass. A few other places out west can boast lots of interesting technical innovations. Here in Kansas City, Missouri, they do curb cuts. So the water that used to rush down the street into a storm sewer is now rushing into this beautiful rain garden. And over here in Madison, Wisconsin, when they do street tree planting projects, they engineer the tree beds to absorb stormwater from the street. So the trees are being completely irrigated. They don't need any outside irrigation. It's sustainable for them, have a much better survival rate than most street trees. And then up here on the top in Seattle, I just love this. What's missing here? There's no curbs. Why are there no curbs? It's because all of the stormwater that each house produces or experiences on its land is absorbed on each individual property. In order to be part of this subdivision, you have to show a stormwater plan for all of the water that falls on your land. So none of it goes into a collective stormwater sewer. And you know, Seattle gets a lot of rain. So if they can figure out how to do this in Seattle, I think we can probably figure out how to do something similar here. New Jersey Cooperative Extension has a really wonderful website through Rutgers University in which they have a photo gallery of all different kinds of rain garden projects around the state. This one is in an industrial park. So the water from these factories and business buildings are being collected from their rooftops and used to irrigate this rain garden. All native plants, really beautiful. Down here, you see a rain garden that was planted at a New Jersey school. Rain gardens are great community projects, and they're fantastic opportunities for doing STEM teaching in schools. All of the skills that are involved in designing and planting and rain gardens are really great for kids to learn. And as you can see, this rain garden has been planted away from the building, and the water's coming down this downspout and into the garden area. And then up here, I love rain gardens in parking lots, and these are being done more and more regularly across the country because it's a great way to introduce greenery into an otherwise really hideous area, parking lot, and also use all the water that's being collected in the parking lot as a source of irrigation rather than stormwater. So I encourage you to just look at their website and get some ideas for different kinds of projects that you could do in your community. Here in Kingston, Rhode Island, the town board wanted to show citizens how easy it was to do a rain garden, to start doing more rain gardening there. And their climate is very similar to what we have on Long Island. So the water used to come down this town hall and go underground in a pipe to the street. But what they did is they diverted the water into a new pipe, which brings it down to the corner of this sloping area. And you can see the rain garden that was sculpted out, and then this big berm that was used with the soil that they dug out. And this is what it looks like from the street corner. It's quite lovely. It's got four-season interest as people drive by. And it was all done by people who live in the town. So it was a town project. Very, very cool. We have one right here in Suffolk County that's pretty easy for us to go look at, and that is at the county building at 423 Griffin Avenue in Riverhead. This is the parking lot for the Suffolk County Soil and Water Conservation District. And I used to work in this building when I was with Cooperative Extension. So I saw this rain garden, which is right in the middle of the parking lot. It has pavement cantilevered all around it, so the water flows down into the rain garden. Although you would never notice that the pavement has that gentle slope when you were getting in and out of your car. But when it rains, this area floods and it becomes a little lake, and then the water quickly drains away. And it goes back to being this beautiful little park where you can sit and have your lunch and watch the hummingbirds and the butterflies and the bees. And there it is, 423 Griffin Avenue. So go take a look. Here at Cornell Botanic Gardens in Ithaca, New York, they use this rain garden approach with their parking lot. You know, when you come to visit the Botanic Garden, you park, get out of your car, and all of the water from the parking lot is flowing down into this swale. The sidewalk that leads to the visitor center goes right across the top of the swale. And on the other side of the swale is this gorgeous rain garden. These are all native plants. This is New England aster, Joe pieweed, Circes canadensis, redbud trees. Just a elegant planting. So where's the best place for a rain garden? Well, if you have one takeaway from this webinar, it is this: water rolls downhill. Yes, water rolls downhill. So the base of a gentle slope is ideal. And if you don't have a slope, if you live someplace where everything is totally flat, but you've got a ton of water coming off your roof and into your driveway, well, you can channel that water from off your roof through a pipe to some part of your yard where you'd like to plant a rain garden. But very important to remember that downhill is best and a gentle slope is ideal. Before you dig a garden, you have to, by law, contact PSEG's Call Before You Dig program to request them to come and do a free mark out of any underground utilities, things like electrical wires or sewage pipes or cables or whatever. And it's very easy. You just dial 811 and they will come and do that for you. Also, if your property has an underground sprinkler system, you can ask whoever installed it to mark out the pipelines for you, so you know exactly what is underneath the earth before you start digging into it. So your first step after you've decided roughly where you think you want to have this garden is to evaluate the soil. Most of our soils on Long Island are pretty sandy or silty, and those are really good soils for rain gardens. However, clayey soils are not so great. They can get kind of waterlogged. They retain water more. And so if you evaluate your soil, if you do a soil test and you discover that your soil is actually pretty clayey, you can try replacing that clayey soil with a more porous mixture. And this is covered on the fact sheet of sand, topsoil, and compost. And then you're going to want to do a percolation test to see how quickly water actually drains into the earth. If you have a sandy, loamy soil, it's probably going to be pretty quickly. Don't be surprised if that water disappears within 5 to 10 minutes. But if you don't, if you have a clayey soil, or if for any reason it takes more than 24 hours for the water to completely be absorbed by the earth, then you really need to choose another site. That is not a good place for a rain garden, because again, a rain garden is not a pond, and you don't want water hanging around certainly not breeding mosquitoes. So rain garden dimensions are all about ratios. Really about the ratio of your watershed, which would be your roof or the hardscape where water is collecting and running off, maybe your driveway. So the ratio of that area to the area of the proposed garden. This wonderful little manual that you see the cover of on the left is available online. It's called Rain Gardens, a how-to manual for homeowners. And its web address is on that fact sheet, but I believe that it's also going to be posted in the chat so that you can, if there's one single resource that you use to help you, go to this manual. It's really excellent. And one of the things that they cover in there are some general rules of thumb. For example, on dimensions, gardens that have heavy soil that tends to be more clayey, need to be about 30% the size of the area that drains into them. Gardens that have sandier soils can be smaller because the water is going to be absorbed faster and go more quickly into the earth. So they can be just 20% the size of the area that drains into them. So here's a pop quiz. If your roof is 20 feet by 50 feet and you have heavy soil, how big should your rain garden be? Well, 20 by 50 is 1,000 square feet. And heavy soils that will require that the rain garden be at least 30% the size of that watershed. So the garden would have to be 300 square feet, right? Because 300 is 30% of 1,000. So it's really not hard. It's just these interesting relationships between the size of the watershed, the size of the garden, the kind of soil you have. Another interesting rule of thumb is for calculating rainwater collection. You know, it's always a little maddening when people say, well, you need 1 inch of rainwater. You're like, well, how big is that? How much is that? Here's a wonderful rule of thumb for figuring that out. A 1 inch rainfall on 1,000 square foot roof equals 600 gallons of water. That is a lot of water, and 1,000 square feet is not very big for a roof space. So you can see that we're probably getting a lot more water on our roofs and our driveways than we have any idea. When we design a rain garden, it's important to always include an opening in the garden so that any flood water, if we had a catastrophic storm and we're getting more and more of them, let's say we got 3 or 4 inches of rain in an afternoon. That could flood, right? It could overwhelm whatever it hits. And so you want to have an opening in the berm or the area of your garden so that the water can exit the garden and flow somewhere that it won't cause damage. For example, maybe into your driveway, maybe into your street. And I'll show you an example of that to come. Next, you want to understand how steep the slope of the site actually is, which is really easy to do using stakes, string, and a level to calculate what we call the grade. So in this top illustration over here, you see a gentle slope, and it's been calculated that this is a 5% slope. And that's based on the fact that if you put a stake here and tie a string to it, and then stretch the string all the way down to where you want the end of the garden to be, which happens to be 10 feet here, and then level it so that you know that you can measure what the height of that string is at the bottom, it turns out to be 6 inches or half a foot. So half a foot is 5% of 10 feet. That makes this a 5% slope. So that is the way people, when they talk about slopes, they talk about the grade of the slope. That's what that percentage means. That's where it derives from. And you can figure that out. It's not that hard. So once you've decided, okay, this is where I want my rain garden to be, then you would start digging out the land here, and you would create this shallow bowl. That's the whole point of the digging, is to create like a large shallow bowl. And the dirt that you dig out, you're going to put over on the end and create a berm. A berm is just a block, really, an obstacle. So that's preventing the water, which is flowing downhill, from going out the garden. It's going to stop there. It's slowing it down, and it's giving any plants that you put in this area a chance to really absorb the water before it sinks into the earth. Rain gardens average 3 to 8 inches deep, depending on how steep their slopes are. So in a shallow slope of less than 4% incline, it could just be 3 or 5 inches deep, which is not very far to dig. If you're doing this by yourself, you could probably handle digging out 3 to 5 inches. In a slope of 5 to 7%, your garden would have to be deeper, 6 to 7 inches, and so on. So any slope that's steeper than 12% really is not appropriate for a rain garden. The water's going to be coming down too steeply, too fast, and it's better in that case to start stepping the land into terraces rather than rain gardens. And if you think about different parts of the world where terraces are part of agriculture, you can see why. For example, in Southeast Asia or in South America, terrace farming is very common. And it's a way of slowing the water, which is coming down a mountain, into large flat areas where that water can be absorbed by the crops that they're growing there. So I would say anything between 4% and 12% is ideal for rain gardening. But beyond that, you really have to go to terracing. Okay, now the fun part, because who doesn't want to talk about plants, really? Plants are the fun part, and choosing rain garden plants. Um, I just, it's like a big puzzle, and you get to fit the right plants to the right place, and I love that. So native plants are the best because they are adapted to our climate. They like a drought and drench lifestyle. They have evolved to survive with exactly the amount of rainwater we get here. And so no other plant community is going to be better than our native plant community to survive in a rain garden. Also, as has mentioned, they provide habitat for pollinators. They don't need fertilizer, and they're beautiful year-round. And certainly this monarch butterfly feels that way about this Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed, which it loves so well. Now, there's a couple websites that list local native plants that I use all the time, and I just thought I'd mention them. One is the New York Floral Atlas. You can Google that. It is fabulous. You can put in the common name, the English name of a plant, or you can put in the scientific Latin name of a plant in their search bar, and they will spit out information about whether that plant is actually native to your county or not. There are a lot of plants that are marketed in nurseries that are called natives, and whether or not they're actually native to Suffolk County is another question. And maybe they're native to the Appalachians, or they're native to the Midwest, or I'm not saying don't use those plants, but I am saying be aware of where the plants come from and why you might be using them. I personally am starting to use more plants from the southeastern part of the United States than I have in the past because of climate change. But I just think it's really important to know where a plant naturally evolved so that you really understand what its relationship with the environment here is going to be, and also what species is it going to, what kind of ecoservice does it provide? Does it support birds and wildlife and insects that you really care about? And for that, I go to this Audubon, the National Audubon Society has a section on its website called Native Plants Database, and you can plug in your zip code and they will spit out a list of plants and all the birds and insects that those plants support. So that to me is just priceless. You know, if I want to attract, for example, here you see a goldfinch. If I want to attract a goldfinch to my yard, I can figure out what do I need to plant to get that goldfinch to come and feel at home. Um, in that case, it would be the American linden tree and echinacea and a lot of seed-bearing plants because that's what the goldfinch loves. So anyway, I think it's really important to not just trust what you see in a nursery as being a native and to do your homework and to really find out what does that native plant like? Does it like sun, shade, water, drought? You know, to make sure that you're putting the right plant in the right place when you get around to planting. Because rain gardens mimic nature. The very center of a rain garden is going to be the wettest area. The middle part of the rain garden, around the bottom of the bowl is going to be wetter. It's going to sometimes flood, but it's not going to be quite as wet as the very bottom. And then the upper part of the rain garden or the berm area is definitely going to be dry, and is going to be a place that you want to put drought tolerant species. So rain gardens are not just about water, they're also about drought tolerance. And the other thing to think about when you're choosing plants, in this case, these are all plants that love a sunny, wet zone, are seasonal interest. You don't want to plant things that only bloom or fruit at one time of year. So the three beautiful flowers that you see here emerge at very different times of the year. The first one is right in the middle, the iris versicolor, blue flag iris, our gorgeous native iris here on Long Island. That will be blooming at the end of May, and it's just a showstopper. Over on the right, the cardinal flower, that doesn't bloom until midsummer. And it's also a showstopper, very different color range. And then on the left, the turtle head, that doesn't bloom until September. So how great to have all three of these in the rain garden blooming at different times in the sunny wet zone of the rain garden. The sunny mid zone, these are some species that like that. Over on the left, you've got Joe Pyeweed. In the middle, this is winterberry, a beautiful small shrub with berries that persist through winter. It's a member of the holly family, but it does lose its leaves. However, it holds on to those beautiful red berries, and the birds just adore it and depend on it throughout the winter. And then on the right, this is our New England aster, and I love New England asters, but so do the deer. So if you live in a place where you have heavy deer browse, this might not be the cultivar, the species of aster that you would choose, but isn't it lovely? Shady wet zone. When you get into the shade, you start being a little more challenged. Okay, what looks great in the shade? This Joe Pye over here on the left is shade tolerant. Sensitive fern down here, also shade tolerant and a fabulous tough ground cover. It will take over. In fact, it's a very, very aggressive kind of monoculture. So if you've got an area that you really need to cover up, that's a good choice. And then on the far right, that's the black chokeberry, which I just adore. And it has beautiful, beautiful berries. Again, the birds really depend on them. And the sunny upland zone. So this would be the hottest, sunniest, driest part of your garden. So you're going to plant things that are really drought tolerant, like bee balm over here on the left, or butterfly weed down here in the middle. This is a milkweed, again, a monarch loving plant, and or black-eyed Susans over here on the right. And this is probably the toughest part, a shady upland zone. However, there are some beautiful plants for shade, for shady upland areas, shady dry areas. Over here on the left, the Amelanchier canadensis is blooming right now. Maybe some of you have it blooming in your yards. It's blooming in mine. It's also known as the serviceberry, and it's one of the Northeast's most beautiful early blooming shrubs. And it's so called because its flowers appear when the ground has thawed enough to properly bury the dead. Hence, funeral services can be held when the serviceberry is blooming. And its flowers probably graced the altars of many New England churches once upon a time when funerals had to wait until spring for the ground to thaw. Then we have Virginia bluebell in the middle. That's a spring ephemeral. It's here and gone, but if it's here, while it's here, it's quite beautiful. And then on the right, our wonderful Virginia creeper, which where I live in East Marion, I have a ton of it. It grows everywhere, up trees, up fences. It has the most beautiful red leaves in the fall and purple berries that the birds just adore. In fact, they will come in and swoop in and just during fall migration, I've seen them strip Virginia creeper of all of its berries. So it's a very important plant. Okay, now here's a little story about a rain garden that I designed for the North Fork Audubon Society in Greenport, New York. North Fork Audubon is the steward of Inlet Pond County Park, and that means that we manage the park in terms of its plant community, and we maintain the Roy Latham Nature Center. And I used to drive on Route 48, the North Road through Greenport, past this every day to work when I was working at Cooperative Extension. And I would look up the hill to this little red house, which is what the Roy Latham Nature Center is also called, the Red House. I would look up at that and I'd see this lawn and I'd see the red house and I'd say, you know, I just think we could do better in terms of environmental demonstration. So I was teaching the Master Gardener program at that point, and I proposed to North Fork Audubon that the Master Gardeners come out and use this as a project. And they loved the idea to plant a rain garden. So in November of 2016, we showed up, and you can see the lawn in front of the house. That's me and a couple of Master Gardeners, dear friends of mine. And this is Roxanne Zimmer, who's now the community horticulture specialist at Cornell Cooperative Extension. So we did our first site visit. We looked at the house. I requested architectural drawings of the roof so I could calculate the watershed up there. But we were really happy to see so many gutters and storm pipes coming down from the roof into this front area. And we did a soil percolation test, and the water went right into the ground. I mean, it's the soil, not surprising, is so sandy that it drained away in less than 5 minutes. I think it was like 3 minutes actually. So we knew it was a good place to put a rain garden. And then that winter, the county decided to put in a ramp, a wheelchair accessible ramp. And they tore up the front of this lawn, which was fine, in front of the house, but they created an area that was much larger than we had initially thought to use as a rain garden. So I calculated the relationship between the roof size, the square footage, and the size of the garden. And I realized, yeah, we could do this. It's a 600 square foot garden, sandy soil. And I made a little sketch for them of the infrastructure. So here's the storm pipe over here coming down from this section of the roof. That's a storm pipe. And then there would be a perforated pipe that would carry water from that into the garden. And then here's another storm pipe over here. And here it is on this drawing. And a perforated pipe would carry this in. And then we would dig out the whole middle and use the soil to create berms that would go all the way around the garden. with one break right here as an outlet for flooding. In case it ever flooded, the water would gush out and go into the parking lot and then eventually the street. And they okayed it. Pretty simple drawing, and I was relieved. So it took, however, some time for that space to dry out enough for volunteers to get in there and dig. So these are master gardener volunteers digging out this garden. Here you can see pretty clearly what it looked like when they were done. There's Roxanne. It's about 8 feet deep, 8 inches, sorry, 8 inches deep in the middle of the garden. It's 8 inches below this level right here, 8 inches below this sidewalk. So there actually is a shallow bowl right there. And all the dirt that we dug out was used to create these berms. And here you can see the outlet. This is the flood outlet for the garden. We decided, because the garden space was so big, to put in a bluestone walk through the middle of it so that people could walk into the garden and see what was growing over here. Otherwise, it would really be pretty inaccessible. Plus, it allowed us to create this, this good outlet for flood water. And once that was done, we laid, we put in the perforated pipes. These are agricultural grade pipes. You can buy them, you know, at any good garden supply or plumbing or agricultural supply store. Basically, the pipes have perforation on the bottom. So when they're attached to the storm pipe and the water flows through them, the water spreads out beneath the line of the soil into the garden. And we purposely only buried them halfway so that they would be visible in case we ever needed to do any work on them, if they got clogged up or anything. And also we wanted the public to see that there are pipes bringing water, although they get completely overgrown. You can't see them at all now. But the end of the pipe gushed water out onto the paving stone, which is ideal. Whenever you've got water gushing out of the end of a pipe, it's always good to have something hard underneath so that that surface doesn't get eroded. And then once all of that infrastructure was in place, we put one thin layer of compost across the whole thing to improve the water retention of the soil. It was so sandy that I was concerned that the tiny plugs that we were going to plant into it might not be able to absorb enough water. So although native plants generally don't need compost, they like a lean soil, not a rich soil. To add compost at this one point in time made sense to me. And I'm really glad we did it, because I think it really did help. And then finally, in October of 2017, we planted the garden. I had been collecting and hoarding plants for it for over a year. And even though keeping them alive in nursery pots throughout the summer took a lot of watering, we opted to wait until the weather cooled down in October to finally plant them under much less stressful conditions. I'm a really big believer in planting natives in the fall. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but this is my planting plan for the garden, and it has changed somewhat over time, but we put in 160 plants from 30 different species, all of which were native to and grown on Long Island. And since we planted it, some of those species died, other species have moved around. Some species have had to be divided. So there have been some changes, but this was the basic planting plan that a bunch of volunteers worked off of to plant it. So autumn planting allows these plants to really focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's developing a healthy root system. The plants don't have to worry about flowering or fruiting or, you know, absorbing a lot of sun and photosynthesizing. They're basically, all of their energy is going down into their roots, and they spend that winter period building a strong root system so that when they wake up again in the spring, usually not until right about around now. Most native plants are just emerging now. Um, they have all of that infrastructure in place. They can withstand the drought then. They can withstand whatever happens because they've got a nice, strong root system. But we did label all the plants. That was important because it's a demonstration garden. We want people to be able to come here and see things that they love and say, oh, where can I get that? How can they can go to their local nurseries and say, I want to buy for example, this is sweet fern, Comptonia peregrina. Why aren't you carrying that? Or where can I find that? This little baby, this I'm going to say it wrong. Arctostaphylos una ursa. Anyway, it's bearberry. Bearberry grows natively throughout the pine barrens, but it was planted on the berms it was like a hors d'oeuvre for deer. They just grazed it down to the nub. So I learned my lesson with bearberry where I live. And I don't plant that in heavily deer browsed areas anymore. So the following spring, we got this huge surprise, this amazing blessing, which was that this huge snapping turtle crawled into the garden. And you can see her over here. She's leaning up against the berm. She's got her tail end here, and she's laying her eggs in the sandy soil. You can see how sandy that soil is. And we were just amazed, plant the garden, and the turtles will come. And so we had the blessing from the mother turtle goddess that this was a good thing. And it was only the beginning. The garden just got better and better. Here it was in June of 2018. That's me. Very happy to see everything growing so well. By July, there's the Joe Pye weed, there's the goldenrod, there's Panicum virgatum switchgrass. Here's Asclepias incarnata, the milkweed, and the cardinal flower, and everything was just buzzing. I mean, literally buzzing. By August, this is just covered with butterflies. It's kind of hard to see here, but up in this area, you can see some white dots. Those are all butterflies. And if you come to this garden in the summertime, that's what you'll see and hear, the buzz of insects. And what do birds love to eat? Insects. So this garden is really serving the wildlife habitat that it was intended to serve. And so here's the goldenrod, more cardinal flower. The blue vervain is like a butterfly magnet. And the ground covers began to fill in. This is Pennsylvania sedge and Maryland golden aster and hay-scented fern. And this is what it looked that first October. So this is 1 year after planting. It was a fabulous run. And there's still a lot of beautiful things blooming here, even in October. This is that aster that I was talking about that's a little bit deer resistant. This is called October Skies. It's a cultivar of aromatic aster, and I have found that the deer tend to leave it alone, probably because it's aromatic. Deer don't always like things that smell strongly. But this garden has had no additional irrigation since it was planted. And we had a little drought that summer. That was a dry summer. It did fine. It's done fine every single year since then. So some of my rain garden favorite plants include Iris versicolor, which is so healthy. We've had to divide and remove clumps of it for the last couple of years. It's just doing really well. And that will be blooming there at the end of this month. The red chokeberry. Down here, this little treasure, Phlox subulata, is such a tough plant. You plant it and it looks so fragile. It looks like tiny little green needles, and you think, oh, how could this possibly be drought tolerant? It is. It lives on the tops of those dry berms, and it blooms and blooms and blooms. It's one of the earliest spring bloomers, and then it's just this lovely green ground cover afterwards. It's just a fabulous plant. Up here is the turtle head in September, blooming in September. Turk's cap lily, our native eastern prickly pear, which we actually ended up moving because it was too close to where kids were reaching in their hands, and we didn't want them to get prickers in their hands. So this plant is now in an out of the way part of the garden. And yeah, it's just always a wonderful place to visit. As my friend Casper discovered, this is actually the Bluestone Path, right? So it's now like a jungle for kids in the summertime because it's grown up so much. Over here is the beautiful meadowsweet, which is sweetly blooming, and it's planted in front of the chokeberry. And deer hate meadowsweet, so that's why they don't go beyond it to try to munch on the chokeberry, which they quite love. So you start to develop these strategies for working with natives and deer, putting one behind another, trying to protect them. And it works, it really works. Down here, you can see the beautiful Pennsylvania sedge, which is growing in now on the berms. And this is bee balm blooming. Anyway, this is what it looked like once upon a time, silly, useless lawn. And this is what it looked like a few years later, this time of year in May. There's the arbustifolia blooming. It's going to be a gorgeous hedge someday. And the meadowsweet's in front of it. So maintenance is really simple. There's no watering. There's no chemicals. You plant it densely. So really it only takes a couple of weedings a year and pruning back. And you do have to flush out your gutters on a regular basis just to make sure that they don't get clogged up, because you want to keep that water flowing into the garden. So here's a couple of resources for helping you design rain gardens. One is a free app. You can get it in the App Store. It's called the Rain Garden app, and it's from the University of Connecticut. You can download that on your phone, and it's got just tons of useful information. And this is one of my favorite design books. It's called Creating Rain Gardens, published by Timber Press. There are a lot of other great books out there, but these are just two things that I have found helpful. And all of those native plant species that you saw in this rain garden are going to be sold at North Fork Audubon's plant sale, May 18th and 19th from 9 to 1 p.m. in Greenport at Inlet Pond County Park. So I would love to hear your questions now about rain gardens, and you're also free to email me with any questions. I'm at rlsimmen@gmail.com.
Thank you, Robin. That was fun, exciting. We have a question here. Can you tell us more about how to do a percolation test without digging out the whole garden?
Absolutely. When I do a percolation test, it's usually just a square foot. Like I'll dig down with a spade about a foot, a hole about a foot deep and a foot wide. And I fill up a big bucket with water and I pour the water in. And then I time it. And you just stand there and you just watch the water. And
Like, is it a gallon of water, a couple of gallons? How
it
do you?
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
No. I mean, I just fill the hole up. So
Yeah.
it's about, whatever.
Whatever fills the hole up.
Yes, because really the issue is how quickly does the water enter the earth?
Right.
And I have found the sites that I've done this on Long Island, I've never had water last more than 10 minutes, because like I said, we tend to have, especially out on the North Fork where I live, we have riverhead loamy, sandy loam is our soil. It's a very porous soil. But but there are places on Long Island where the soil is not so sandy. So you just want to make sure that that water drains out definitely within 24 hours. I would say if it took more than 6 or 7 hours, I would be surprised. I just can't quite imagine that out here, but yeah, that's what you just want to guarantee that that water is moving into the ground. Yeah.
Wonderful. We have some compliments for you. Kathy says, really good webinar. Thank you. We have another Kathy, very informative. We have Sabrina says, thank you. That was a great presentation. And Nancy says, thanks from Lynn, Green, and Macy. Beautiful and inspiring. Well, while we are waiting for questions, I have a quick question. I think this is regarding the shady upland plants. I think you mentioned Virginia creeper and serviceberry, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yes, and like they do well in shade as well. They are shade tolerant plants. I have mine in full sun. That's why I was a bit curious about that.
Yes, they do. They do well in shade. In fact, yeah, they do. And plants are very forgiving. Like we have these categories for them, and they often do. You work with them for a while, and you start to realize, oh, you know, it has a broader application than sometimes it's assigned. But yeah, my Amelanchier definitely gets sunshine, but it also has a lot of shade from nearby trees. So a lot of our native species, especially the understory trees, they like shade. They need some shade. They need some protection. And Amelanchier is definitely one of those. Although it could also do well in full sun as a specimen tree. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Mine is in the southwest, so it gets full blast.
Yeah, and that could be a lot for it. That could stress it out a little bit, but you'll find it. Yeah.
Good to know. I mean, let's see. We have another question coming up from Beth. Are there sedges that will work in shade?
Are there sedges?
Yes.
Yes, in fact the Carex pennsylvanica, which is the one that we planted primarily in that rain garden, is a shade tolerant sedge.
Okay. Could you repeat that name again, please? Or what sedge is that?
Sure. It's Carex is
Carex,
Yeah.
yeah.
Pennsylvanica.
Pennsylvanica, yeah.
It's
We
also
have
known as Pennsylvania sedge.
Pennsylvania sedge, yeah. We have another question from Bea, the developer who built the homes where I live in Manhasset, stripped the land of all its topsoil and left us with clay. How do you change the design of a rain garden to amend the clay soil?
Oh, that is really a tough one. I mean, you actually already alluded to the issue, which is that there is no soil, there's just clay. So the soil has been stripped off. You can amend clay, but it's very, very time consuming. It takes a lot of it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of trial and error. You do it by adding percentages of topsoil and sand and compost. And so I would say that is not an easy problem to solve. If there was a soil layer that used to be there on top of the clay, if it's possible to ascertain what that soil layer was composed of and then try to recreate it, that would be one approach. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not an easy one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad, kind of. Yeah. We have more questions. Sabrina asking, I don't have a lot of space in my yard. Is it crucial to hit the 20 to 30% ratio, or is there some leeway?
Well, it really, what you need to figure out is how much water is going to be entering that space. And so if you've got a very large watershed, like if you have a big roof and you only want a very small garden, the garden has to be, if it's sandy soil, it needs to be 20% the size of that watershed. So if if the roof was 1,000 square feet, then your garden would have to be at least 200 square feet in order to absorb the water from that roof safely. So that's where you really have to start understanding the ratio between the watershed and the size of the garden that watershed will require.
Quickly, just part of this question I just wanted to ask. The garden that you designed here, it's like the beautiful, but is it 10 feet from the house?
No, it's not. It's about, I'd say the planted area is about 5 feet from the house.
Okay, and
Oh,
seems good, right? I mean, yeah,
yeah,
because I have to, because we don't have 10 feet. I don't know if I can get that 10 feet away, but just to know, I mean,
yeah. I think, it's funny, with every situation has its own parameters. And because this soil is so sandy, the water goes down just like that. It doesn't linger at all. And because other things have been planted very close to the house in the past,
Mhm.
I didn't see any problem with doing it just 5 feet away. But, again, these rules are, they tend to be guidelines more than hard and fast rules.
Right, absolutely. And as a follow-up to the same question, we have 20% is optimal, right? If not smaller garden, can the outflow solve the excess question?
Rather than focusing on the outflow, I would focus on seeing if you could limit the amount of water flowing into it from the roof. Like maybe there's a way to section the roof so that you're just taking water from one section of roof, not the entire thing. Because you never know when we're going to get a very big rainstorm. It could happen. And so if you've got a tiny garden and the entire, I, I don't, I mean, I suppose it's possible to limit, to try to work with the outflow overflow, but I don't think that would be as optimal a solution as trying to change the relationship, the initial relationship between the watershed and the garden itself until it fit together right.
Thank you. I have one more question here from Kathy. Crazy question. When planting natives, are they more susceptible to being eaten, devoured by insects? Some coneflower I planted last year was decimated. Is that because we have reduced native plants so much that insects flock to them?
Well, there's a lot in that question. There's an assumption that insects eating the plants is a bad thing, which is not necessarily true. Plants can often withstand a lot of insect damage and still produce great seeds. So from the plant's perspective, it's fine. We might think it looks not so great, but the plant's doing okay. No, plants and insects have their own relationships, that's what life is based on, is their relationships. And so I there are times when insects, for one reason or another, will completely devour a plant or a tree. But generally speaking, that species of tree or plant doesn't disappear. It's just that individual for that year. So yeah, I wouldn't, I don't think that that the lack of native plants is why insects go after native plants when they are available.
Thank you, Robin. I mean, this has to be one of the most exciting webinars I've been to. I think
Oh,
we can go on discussing this and, we'll still not have enough time, right? I mean, lots of questions and I think lots to digest, actually. Lots of things to digest. I love the resources that you pointed us to. Really cool, and would love to visit the rain garden here in Greenport and check it out. It's really, really something different.
well,
Um,
I look forward to seeing folks, and it's always wonderful to get to share information with people who really care about the natural world. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.